one of the reasons why I was not going to share my birth story on here or on Instagram, anywhere, just on social media or YouTube, was because I was nervous. I had my baby Nikash Sebastian Dialin, Ash for short. I had him on February 1st at around 5 o'clock in the morning. I originally, when I was pregnant, wanted to have an elective C-section. And that was because I have friends that are doctors, friends who have had C-sections. You know, when it came down to it, it just made sense to me. Having an elective C-section sounded good because I could plan it. It didn't seem like the complications really were that different. Everyone's like, oh, C-sections are so much worse for the baby. But actually, if you go into the real research, they're like very slight. But towards the very end of my pregnancy, I was talking to my doctor, Dr. Robert Katz, and he was kind of like, for the record, I think you should try vaginal birth. I think you should just, go for it. So I said, okay, fine. You know what? I had a very easy pregnancy. I actually enjoyed it. Let's try it. On January 31st, I actually had my last check-in with my doctor. I went in that morning and he was like, you're like a centimeter dilated. You could probably, wait a little bit longer. I don't think you're gonna be having this baby. As I got home that evening, like around 2, 3 o'clock, I started feeling what I now know were contractions. It just started feeling like I had really bad menstrual cramps, I guess, but they weren't unbearable. So I was like, maybe this is those Braxton Hicks or something like that. So I was still working that day. We had a video shoot happening here. I had all of my crew here, the mixed makeup team. I actually had planned to go into the hospital in the morning because they were thinking about inducing me. That's a whole long story, maybe another story, another video, another time. But they were thinking about inducing me in the morning, so I kind of had this idea that I was probably going to be there in the morning anyway. That night, I went to bed. I remember I showered like around midnight. I just woke up and I had this intense feeling. It was painful. It was definitely contractions, and honestly, it felt like I had to take a big poop. That's exactly what it felt like. I went to the bathroom, sat on the toilet for a little bit. Nothing was happening, and then it would like go away. So I kind of would just sit there for a little bit and then, do I need to stay here on the bathroom? Maybe I should wake my husband up. So I went back to bed. It's about 12:15 at this point, and I'm laying there and I'm looking over at my husband Arun in bed, and he's passed out, sleeping like a baby. Lucky him. I was like, I don't think I should wake him. This is probably just me overreacting. But then it just started getting more and more intense, and I was like, I need to wake him. So I wake up my husband. He had this app that the doctor recommended that counts your contractions, because they're like, you shouldn't come into the hospital until your contractions are like every 3 to 4 minutes. And I think it was like, I can't even remember. That's how, I can't even remember what they said, but it was like every 3 to 4 minutes you should be having contractions when you actually come in. So Arun pulls out this app and he's like, okay, go. And I'm like, okay, it's starting. And I'm like, ooh, it's starting, and stop. So he's timing it over and over again. And he looks over at me, he's like, they're 3 minutes apart. We need to go. So we just both looked at each other, and luckily I had my bag already packed, because guess what? I did a video for you guys. So I did a hospital bag video. That bag was sitting there. It was all packed. We hopped in the car, drove to the hospital. Luckily, it's middle of the night. It's past midnight at this point, so there's no traffic. We get to the hospital in like 15, 20 minutes. That worked out perfectly. We get there. I think we've got this all down. We prepared, everything is good. And the nurse says to me, did you fill out your paperwork? I said, I pre-registered. And she goes into the computer. She goes, you did, but you didn't fill out your paperwork. And I'm like, huh? Like, paperwork? What paperwork? I had to go down a hall, even though I was about to have a baby, and go fill out my paperwork. And you can tell this happens all the time, because I go into this office and this woman's just looking at me and she's like, okay, she's like typing to something, print, and she's like, you need to sign this. This just tells you this, sign. This tells you this, sign. And she's like, I know. And I'm like, like sign, and then it'd go in, and I'd be like, fine. So I'm doing this, and then we have to walk back through the hall, back to the maternity ward. And finally they let me in. You get into the hospital room. They hand you, basically a hospital gown. You get into the bed. They start to hook up wires. I was like, yes, I do want an epidural. I didn't get one right away, so I got to experience what some real contractions feel like, because they were busy. And so I could hear the nurse. She was a great nurse, by the way. I could hear her, she kept calling over, and she's like, my patient has asked for an epidural and she is in pain. And I had to, hold tight. They come into the room, and I think this is kind of where things took a little bit of a turn. They had in like I guess there's like paperwork and some notes about you. They had in those notes that I was supposed to be there in the morning anyway, and they were gonna potentially induce me with Pitocin. I don't know much about Pitocin. I didn't know much about Pitocin then. I didn't know much about it now. I had said yes to it though, and that was my choice. I can already see the comments that are about to start happening about why I chose to do this. Again, it's a long story, but I said yes to inducing me the next day. It was in my notes. So they're like, since we already had you here, like that you were gonna be here just in, just a few more hours in the morning, we're gonna just give you a little touch of Pitocin, just a little touch of it. I'm one of those people, I'm just so sensitive to anything you give me. And again, I hadn't had an epidural yet, so my contractions just start to pick up. And at this point, I was about 3 to 4 centimeters dilated. She gave me the Pitocin and then she goes, you might as well just go to sleep because this is gonna be a while. You guys should get some rest. And then suddenly, I had this contraction where I'm like, oh my gosh, I just feel like my entire body completely tightened up. And I was like, ugh, like I can't do this. They put this monitor around your belly. They were starting to lose his heartbeat with that monitor every single time I had a contraction. So then, fast forward, they give me the touch of Pitocin, and then just a little while later, and I have no concept of time, you guys, at this point. I don't know if this was minutes later. I don't know if this was an hour later, because I just cannot remember this. It's so weird. I can't remember exact timing of anything. Turns out it's like a 5-minute contraction. Contractions last about a minute max. This was a 5-minute contraction, and this is because I'd had like this Pitocin, and they were like, whoa, I see like 10 nurses suddenly like run into my room. Everybody's kind of like trying to be calm, but something's going on because why are all these people in my room suddenly? And they come over and they're like, we're going to actually have to do a couple things. First, we're going to give you something. I can't even recall what it was, but it was the opposite of Pitocin. So basically they're like, we need to cool it because that contraction was way too intense. We lost your baby's heartbeat. This is looking bad. You can see like there's this resident over here. She's like, let's have a conversation in just a little bit, And I'm like, oh goodness, what is going on? And they explained to me that they are going to have to put a monitor on the baby's head. The baby is not out yet. The baby is still inside of me, and they're like, we're going to have to put a monitor on the baby's head. I've already got some wires happening because they've got like an IV on you and stuff, and they're like monitoring you, so you feel uncomfortable already. And they're like, we're just gonna hold you down, and we're gonna have to put this up inside you, and into you, and onto his head. It won't hurt him. I'm like, it won't hurt me? They're like, it might be a little painful. I have not had an epidural yet. They put this monitor in, and it was really pretty painful. It was freaky and painful and weird all at the same time. So then we can hear the heartbeat. So, phew. And P.S., right after that happens, guess who came in? The guy that's gonna give me the epidural. So I finally got an epidural, which was such a relief. You guys, it's like, Finally the resident was like, we had a talk with your doctor. He's been monitoring all of this. And we think what's best is, we think you should have a C-section. And they're like, obviously this is your decision. You're only 3 centimeters dilated. We can't guarantee the safety of the baby because every time we lose his heartbeat, there's a chance that you're gonna cause some kind of brain damage or anything like that. So they're being just really safe. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And it was like the minute I said yes, everything went really fast. Like in a TV show when you're like you see somebody from someone's point of view when they're like being pushed down the halls of the hospital and stuff. And I just remember the nurses looking down on me and they're like, keep your arms in, keep your arms in. I guess I kept putting my arms out. I don't know what I was doing, but I was doing something with my arms, I guess, because they kept that's all I remember is keep your arms in, keep your arms in. They wheel me into this operating room. It's suddenly so bright and cold in there. That's one of the main things I remember. I don't know why that's what I remember. This is all just a big blur to me at this point because all that started to happen from there was I felt like I was gonna pass out. It felt like I was only there for maybe a minute and I hear the doctor say, baby's coming. Then I remember hearing the sound of a baby crying. So it just felt like it was only a minute that I was there, but I'd obviously been there for much longer than that. So what my husband said he saw was he had been sitting outside, he had put on all his scrubs. He'd been waiting outside. They kind of forgot because, again, we're in an emergency C-section. They forgot to go get him, so they bring him in. They don't warn him that I'm already on there, cut open. They're about to take the baby out. So he got to see that. I don't think he wanted to, but he's a trooper. comes around to the front to like talk to me, but all he sees is me like just shaking like crazy. And then, you know, they hold the baby up to him. They kind of like showed the baby to me, but again, I was out of it. Eyes closed, and my husband snapped a picture. It's a little bit of a graphic picture, so I'm gonna warn you right now, this is the picture. You can see the baby being held up and then me in the background. My stomach is not sewn back together yet, so it just looks like this crepey skin on top of my body. And I remember hearing the doctor say to my husband, "You're allowed to go to the baby, you can go to the baby." I asked my husband later on, because I remember hearing that happen, and he was like, "I was just worried about you. I feel like I'd never seen you like that." You know, it was this experience where he's like seeing me and he, you know, it worried him. He went over and he cut the umbilical cord, took some pictures, and then he came back to me. They sewn me back up apparently, and then they have to put you in this recovery room. And so as I'm like wheeling out, I had requested, and this is one of the things I love most about the hospital I was at, is that they're really for skin-to-skin contact with your baby, even after a C-section. I just remember they're like trying to wheel me out of the room. I'm still in the operating room, and they're like, "Do you want to see your baby?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they hold the baby like that, and they're like, "We're gonna put him on you right now." And I was like, "Well, wait, let's go," because I was like, my arms don't move, and it was kind of sad. They like plopped him right here, and then they just went like that. And I was like, "Oh, my baby." I looked at him. It's such a crazy experience when you see your baby for the very first time. It's an amazing experience. I can't even begin to tell you what it was that I felt. You know, all that craziness aside, this was the best thing I've ever done. I mean, my baby he is the best thing I have ever done, I've ever made. I don't even know, it's crazy. It's like we still look at our child and we're like, we made this. We feel really blessed, and I'm so happy that I got to share that experience with you. So thank you so much for coming along on this ride, and I will see you soon.